Story 1. They haven't been fair for years. Gerrymandering was just the start. Story 2. Everyone should be vigilant, because Trump definitely wants to make the elections unfair. But honestly, there is no evidence that he is capable of doing so. He and his party have been decisively defeated in recent elections. Even in the races Republicans won, Democrats saw a large drop in support. If he could do anything, it would be to scare people into not voting. I think more people would be angry and vote out of spite, but who knows? The comments here will be doom and gloom, but I expect most people will still vote and be able to do so safely. Story 3. This is unlikely to be fair. Many restrictions are likely on who can vote and when, and that is if Donald Trump does not proclaim a national emergency that he claims would allow him to postpone elections indefinitely. Things are looking very bleak here. Edit. Please do not read my comment as an excuse not to vote. If you have the opportunity, vote, damn it. Donald Trump did not win the last election. Non-voter apathy is what got him elected. Story 4. When have elections ever been truly fair? Power struggles, money, lobbying, and media influence have long shaped outcomes. That does not mean votes are not counted, but it does mean the playing field has never been level. The real issue is not secret rigging. It is whether a system so influenced by money and access can fully reflect the public's will. Story 5. They will not be fair, both because of existing problems and the tactics Trump may try to use. The open question is the extent and impact of that unfairness and whether it will meaningfully change the results. Thankfully, states and counties still run our elections, and local officials have generally been less eager to discard American democracy than national Make America Great Again movement figures. Despite his efforts, Trump does not have the army of loyal stormtroopers he wants. He is still constrained by courts and other officials, which may not last forever but should hold through this year. Story 6. For the most part, I believe elections will maintain their integrity. There will be the usual legal challenges from former President Donald Trump, but he does not control most state governments, and most redistricting attempts have not been successful. While there will be numerous legal attacks and more restrictive voting measures, it is unlikely the election will be rigged on the scale of Russia or North Korea. Spreading this apathetic attitude is dangerous and counterproductive. As a United States citizen, one of the most meaningful actions you can take is to vote. Not voting helped create this situation, so do not prematurely convince others that their vote is irrelevant. Story 7. To be fair, gerrymandering made elections unfair to begin with. It's only getting worse. Story 8. Our president is in prison if he is not in office. It is not a question of whether he will try to cheat. It is a question of how much cheating he will get away with. Story 9. I was told that questioning an election's results was pretty insurrectionary. Story 10. I am not confident the last election was fair. 1. Elon Musk's interference and a fraudulent lottery. 2. Bomb threats were called in to voting centers. 3. Ballot counters were not certified properly. 4. The holders of the certifications are Republicans. 5. The owners of the voting devices are Republicans. 6. The owner of one specific corporation is not legally allowed to own voting companies but does so through a network of shell companies. 7. The Republican Party erased voter rolls. 8. They then sent armed supporters to intimidate others. 9. Voting centers were closed in Democratic areas, forcing millions to use one or two voting locations. 10. Supporters of the Make America Great Again movement within the United States Postal Service threw mail-in ballots in the woods, depriving hundreds of their votes. 11. In addition, the Donald Trump appointee at the United States Postal Service dismantled mailing machines and processing lines in Democratic areas shortly before the election, intending to slow down mail-in ballots that favored Democrats. 12. Russia interfered in major elections since 2016 by paying people such as Tim Pool and other Republican Party infiltrators. 13. The Election Truth Alliance and other independent voting integrity experts, who have done studies on how Russia and Belarus are not democracies, see the same patterns here. 14. Even the Democratic National Committee rigged the 2016 primary election against Bernie Sanders. A primary is an election held in the same year as the general election. 2016 was not free and fair because of Russian and Donald Trump interference. 2020 was not free and fair. Similar fraudulent interference was likely attempted but failed. 2024 was definitely not free and fair. Story 11. The American experiment is over. From this point forward, America will be very similar to Russia. If anything, a puppet politician who answers to the current administration will be installed. The administration will allow technology oligarchs to squeeze everything out of the American people as long as they stay loyal. The last election was rigged, and Elon Musk used Dogecoin to cover it up. The next election will be the same. It seems chaotic, but I suggest everyone enjoy the country we have now because in 10 years it will be completely unrecognizable. Story 12. United States elections have been deeply corrupted by the Republican Party since 2000. Donald Trump added massive amounts of illegal foreign money and influence operations to that corruption. The only surprise for Trump was that his corruption did not succeed in 2020. That was corrected in 2024. Story 13. Elections do not matter when politicians can be bought. It is not a democracy until campaign financing is completely reformed. The upcoming election, whether red or blue, will not change this. The rich will keep getting richer and the poor will keep getting poorer, because representatives are beholden to those who pay for them, not to their constituents. Story 14. Yes, it is going to be fair. If we start conspiracy theories about everything, we are no better than they are. Story 15. To be honest, I don't think it matters. For a long time, Americans have been given the illusion of choice. Parties pick candidates to retain power. They can and do tell certain people to drop out to steer the public toward or away from their preferred choices. There have been only a few exceptions, such as Barack Obama and Donald Trump. Even so, both were primarily populist picks and were co-opted by the donor class, ultimately following a pro-business, anti-labor script that contributed to the deterioration of middle-class American life. In my opinion, Americans need to be more critical of their own parties and more willing to have cross-political conversations with neighbors. Individuality has been weaponized to keep us divided and fighting while the wealthy continue to evolve and adapt a system that keeps us down. Their power will not yield to the better future we want. Story 16. Trump will take us to war and suspend elections, claiming it as an excuse. Story 17. I don't know why so many people think it would be unfair. Red won in 2016, blue won next because red did a bad job, and red won again because blue did a bad job. If blue won the next time, it would not be because they cheated. That would contradict most of what has been said here. Story 18. Define fair. If you mean whether the votes that take place will be counted correctly and reported, the answer is yes. There is no reason to believe that has not consistently been the case. Will the districts be gerrymandered to give a party an advantage? Yes. Will there be efforts to discourage people unlikely to vote for the current administration from voting at all? Yes. Will political action committees and superpolitical action committees lie and attempt to poison and manipulate social media? Yes. The election system as a whole is not going to be hacked or compromised, but individual bad or incompetent actors will create some issues that may appear malicious. These are such tiny drops in the bucket as to be irrelevant. Story 19. Now that one of the major voting machine companies is owned by one of Donald Trump's cronies, we are well and truly fucked. Story 20. What may happen? Troops will be deployed to intimidate Democratic voters. Immigration and customs enforcement officers will harass and block streets and entrances to polling places. Federal interference under the guise of auditing the results will actually destroy ballots and make Democratic poll workers disappear. Scum of the earth Republicans will sit back and let our nation be destroyed because they are evil snakes. What might also happen? Independents and moderates may wake up, hold their Republican members of Congress accountable, and come out in record numbers to rid us of the Republican Party-led reign of terror and give us the numbers needed to impeach Donald Trump. All the stupidity will end as Vance works hard to be electable. Story 21. When were they last fair? I have not had faith in the election for a long time. Story 22. It will probably be fine. The margin of fraudulent votes is usually so minuscule that it is not worth mentioning. Story 23. I am not convinced we have had a fair election in quite some time. I do not believe the next one will be fair. The question is which side will cheat more effectively. Story 24. It depends on what fair refers to. In terms of results being tabulated, yes. I would love to hear the thoughts of people who have served at a polling place. Story 25. I have absolutely no idea what to think about anything anymore. Story 26. I have zero faith in our country's machinations. A pedophile billionaire president has turned everything into a circus. He tells his followers to blame everyone but themselves, and it keeps getting worse. He does whatever he wants for himself and his wealthy friends. He does not care about anyone else, and he is getting away with it. Make America Great Again needs to go the fuck away, and we should never allow a cult of personality to surround a billionaire president with zero experience again. That he can do all this shows our system is more corrupt than I thought. Story 27. They have not been fair for years, but it will be worse this time. I only hope we can overcome that. A minority is now in power, and the majority of the country does not support this administration. Story 28. Partisan voters will often claim voter interference or find conspiracy theories to explain a loss. Nobody likes to lose, and partisan voters are even less likely to be open to others' views or reasoning. Story 29. There will be minor dirty tactics, not major ones. Our election system is resilient. It is actually about 10,000 separate elections. Most of them are run by local election officials who have been doing it for years. There are a few bad actors, but most do their job. There will be attempts to keep people from voting by closing offices, moving ballot boxes, and other similar tactics. I also think there will be a push to postpone the elections, but I doubt it will be successful. Story 30. Honestly, I am still trying to get over the events of today. I am tired, boss. Story 31. Fuck no. I have no faith in the future of our governance whatsoever. Story 32. There is a 0% chance it will be fair, and some chance it will not even happen. Story 33. There are too many loopholes through which elections might be rigged. 1. Absentee ballots might be lost in the mail. 2. Voters might choose not to vote for a popular candidate. 3. Republicans may implement intimidation tactics through enforcement of voter identification. 4. Electronic ballot boxes could be hacked. If that happens, extreme party officials could bribe or coerce technicians to secure their loyalty so hacks favor their party rather than providing legitimate oversight. There is no federal law that fully protects against political discrimination. Both parties are galvanized by extreme measures taken to secure recent elections. There is no guarantee that violence will not erupt in the next election if one party becomes desperate. The winner may be tempted to use the military to enforce their victory. Story 34. I am concerned. Trump, Vance, Miller, and others are behaving and speaking as if they have no intention of facing any consequences. That could only happen if they never leave. Why are they so confident? They should be terrified. Story 35. Since the person in office still insists he won in 2020, his administration does not respect the rule of law, and the Supreme Court is criminally partisan. I am concerned that the Republicans will try to rig everything and the court will back them up. Story 36. They know they cannot win again, so they will intimidate, cheat, gerrymander, lie, and so on to try to remain in power. There have been many bomb threats, and it is likely an actual bomb will be detonated. If one actual bomb occurs, all the remaining threats will be taken more seriously. Mark my words. They will also send repressive forces to try to intimidate or remove people at the polls. Not to mention rigged voting machines, especially in future elections. They also cannot trust many of the election judges. There is very little scrutiny for who can participate since it is essentially volunteer work and pays very little. You can bet extreme supporters of the Make America Great Again movement will be eager to serve as election judges, particularly in Democratic-leaning swing states. Story 37. I fully expect Republicans to take unfair actions against every Democratic candidate who wins an election. They will do everything possible to deny election results, delay confirmations, or reverse votes. Story 38. I feel cautiously optimistic, but there's always concern about misinformation and how it might influence voters. Story 39. I am not confident, but I am hopeful because most elections flipped blue last year. Story 40. There is no way you can argue it would be fair because of gerrymandering. Story 41. They've never been truly free and fair from the beginning. The real beacon of democracy is Australia. Story 42. It's hard. There are too many monitors and redundant procedures. Cheating happens through gerrymandering and voter suppression. Messages like this promote it. People must realize that voting matters. Story 43. Next election? Homie, the last several elections were likely rigged. Story 44. I genuinely do not think our elections have been truly fair since the 1990s. The erosion of election integrity has worsened with each election, and as a result we have ended up with fascism. Story 45. Local elections, probably. I have some reasonable doubts about national elections. Story 46. I lost faith in the American government long ago. I would like to believe that we will have free and fair elections, but the Trump administration will almost certainly try to rig them, and the Democrats have somehow reached new depths of cowardice and incompetence. I cannot say that I like our chances. Story 47. I believe the alleged sexual offender should be held accountable. His actions have made the world worse. Story 48. I had a paragraph explaining that I do not believe the elections will be fair, but it was removed by Reddit. Each hedged. Story 49. You mean they flagrantly announced they would interfere, consistently bragged about rigging the election, firmly stated they will stay in power regardless, and the majority of the United States still believe this will end by a vote. I am sick with horror. Story 50. The Republican Party should be dissolved and replaced by a new party. Story 51. I feel confident that the last election was hacked and the results were adjusted to pick a winner. Story 52. It's not the integrity of the system I worry about. It is the quality of the people running it. Too many far-right and far-left partisans are winning elections, and the country is being pulled in all directions, which causes political fatigue. If you asked me today what I would change about the United States, I would abolish the political party system and impose term limits for every elected official, from the President of the United States down to the county court clerk. I would also make all judicial positions elected. Judges now fall into the same partisan categories, and both sides interpret the law to fit their needs. Story 53. Our elections give the illusion that voting makes a difference. Story 54. I have completely checked out. I am just here to observe the train wreck. Story 55. An election that uses voting machines and does not require identification cannot be considered secure. Story 56. Once we require voter identification, elections will be much more secure. We already have voter identification for state and local elections, so I do not see why we would not require it for presidential elections. Story 57. Not one bit. Our country is a business run by billionaires who do not care about us. Story 58. When Trump was elected the first time, Democrats cried, tampering. When Biden won, Republicans called it stolen. It's a fucking joke. Nearly all politicians are corrupt. Story 59. United States elections have never deviated from their written rules. Whether one likes those rules is a different matter. They are a far cry from the fair elections in autocracies such as Venezuela, Russia, Hungary, and China. Recently, they have been influenced by foreign actors, including Russia, Iran, China, and others through legal means, and we have no clear answer to that. Story 60. I am confident Republicans will cheat. They will deploy the biggest cheating operation they have ever done by far. Story 61. We have not had a fair election since Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission was decided. That decision legally allowed wealthy donors and corporations to buy elections, and we will not have a fair election until it is overturned. Story 62. Trump and the corrupt Republicans who support him will do anything to stay in power. If the Democrats sweep, we can believe it was a fair election. If they do not, it was rigged. Elon's son already said Trump was not the real president. Children repeat what they hear, and Elon would be in prison if Trump had not won. Do with that what you want. Story 63. This will only end in bloodshed and revolution. I have zero reason to think we will ever have a fair election again. Story 64. I think they'll be as fair as they ever were, but we also have a lot of idiots here. Story 65. Texas has been and likely still is a blue state. It had a Democratic governor and Richardson. The only reason it became so Republican was ballot gerrymandering. Story 66. I honestly do not think we will have another election as long as he is alive. Story 67. United States elections are compromised. Gerrymandering has largely shifted political power to a conservative minority. Voting rights are being taken away widely. A large portion of the United States population does not support either major party, so they do not vote and their voices go silent. Make no mistake, Donald Trump will try to interfere with elections. He was an instigator and complicit in the attempted coup of January 6, 2021. Story 68. I would bet my life savings that we have United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement and the United States Department of Homeland Security roaming every polling station, intimidating and abducting people. Even if they are not charged and are set free later, they will have missed the window to vote. Story 69. No. That person will claim fraud, try to stop voting, and throw out our results. Story 70. No. I do not believe that last one was either, nor the one before it. They just did not cheat hard enough then. Story 71. The most unfair elections I have seen are the Democratic presidential primaries. Bernie Sanders was treated unfairly twice. Story 72. I still have faith in our voting systems, but I have lost faith in the voter base. Story 73. Americans have no idea what constitutes unfair elections. No one is threatening to kill you if you vote, using the military to disregard ballots, or winning elections by 99%. Those are issues seen in some developing countries and in South American elections. In the United States, election corruption often means people do not like the outcome of an election and say, it must be rigged. Let's be honest. Story 74. Some thoughts from a non-American. I am not an expert on your voting system. The Electoral College seems bizarre in this day and age, so forgive my skeptical outside view and limited information bubble. Things do not feel good for voting rights. Trump's strategy centers on delegitimizing outcomes, narrowing the electorate, and controlling certification choke points. That pattern already exists. He is targeting mail-in voting. He appears to have changed postal markings that show when a ballot was mailed so ballots may instead show processing dates, which he can claim invalidate them. Voter identification requirements are another lever. Aggressive list purging removes infrequent voters and people with data mismatches. Re-registration burdens fall unevenly across demographics. There are efforts to influence the census to affect who is eligible. They have a huge amount of data, with firms and actors combing databases and compiling comprehensive profiles on many people. Companies like Palantir and individuals such as Peter Thiel are processing mass data and are deeply involved with the Republican Party and the Heritage Foundation. Redistricting and blatant gerrymandering are being done with no subtlety. Election disputes are funneled into friendly state courts and eventually into the Supreme Court. He already has his personal militia, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, on the ground, masked enforcers with a large budget who can intimidate voters and poll workers or stop people from voting, for example if they appear Latino. Those are the things he is already doing now. In 2020, his main themes were Dominion voting machines and mail-in voting. He will push the rigged election narrative harder than ever if they lose the midterms. This time it feels broader, more structural, and more strategic. Questions to Americans here. Are you confident the next elections, midterms, or presidential will be fair? Are you concerned that parts of the system have already been broken? Which parts of the system do you think have the strongest influence to keep things fair and stop a bad faith actor? How can Democrats or all Americans prepare for that? Genuinely curious to hear perspectives from people who live with this system, especially those involved in election work, law, or local administration. Story 75. I am not even confident about the integrity of the last election. Story 76. I have zero faith in the United States government or any of its institutions' responsiveness to the will of the people. American democracy is just old-school palace intrigue, with competing factions that use propaganda to make people think that going to the ballot box will fix anything. No matter what happens in 2026 and 2028, the United States will continue to decline internationally, the rich will get richer at home, and eventually it will all collapse. Story 77. We have the Electoral College, which makes many of our elections unfair. It is a holdover from the era of slavery. It dilutes the value of urban voters and gives rural votes more weight. It is undemocratic. Story 78. United States citizens have experienced a history in which elections favored wealthy white people, and the nation has not made enormous progress since then. Story 79. I firmly believe the voting machines were compromised in 2024, and possibly even in 2016 and 2020. In 2016, Trump won every county he needed to win, the exact combination. In 2020, due to coronavirus disease 2019, there were many mail-in ballots, and it was not as easy to manipulate the tallies. In 2024, polls showed that Trump was likely to lose going into the election. Trump has said that Elon Musk knew about the voting machines. There were reports of software being pushed to the voting machines right before the elections, and statistics showing discrepancies. The larger question is whether there will be such an overwhelming backlash in 2026 that it overrides the numbers fudging. Story 80. I do not think a United States presidential election has ever been fair. I am not certain the last one was legitimate. I have almost no faith in the next one. I will still vote, though. Story 81. The next election will not be fair. The question is whether it will be outright stolen. Story 82. They are abducting us and sending us to countries where we have no ties, to the most notorious prisons, and deleting the records. They are murdering innocent people in the streets. They have hijacked the internet with bots and censored our media. They rape children and protect people who rape children. They are invading foreign states we are not at war with and planning invasions of our allies. No, I will show up to vote anyway. If you voted for this, fuck you. You are a disgrace to everyone who ever bled or died for our freedom. Have the day you deserve. Story 83. I truly feel like voting does not matter. You get the same choices in many elections. Only the presidential candidates' names change more frequently. It really feels like how South Park has always presented it. A giant douche versus a turd sandwich. Story 84. They will be just as fair as the last dozen. The losing side will claim election fraud, as usual, but will have no evidence to support it. Story 85. Our last presidential election was rigged. Several counties showed extensive evidence of tampering. Every battleground state had evidence of manipulation in Trump's favor. Story 86. They are still probably fairer than those run by Moscow or Beijing. Story 87. Let me put it this way. It does not matter to me or my family. We are getting passports and looking into relocating to Germany, as my mother was born there and my grandmother was not married at the time, which is a huge bonus. We will move if the next major election is not a Democratic clean sweep. If Americans are still voting for Trump and the Republican Party after all this insanity, then it is only a matter of time before this empire falls. As long as the dollar does not crash, I will make it one way or another. If it does, then you are all fucked along with me. Story 88. I am 70% convinced that 2024 was a sham election. A pedophile, rapist, traitor took every swing state in one of the worst campaigns we have ever seen. Story 89. Laughing out loud. No, we have never had fair elections. I expect that going forward we will not have any elections. Story 90. Do not read any of this bullshit. Get to the polls and vote. Story 91. Laughing out loud. No, I want to get my wife and daughter out of this country. But who wants Americans at this point? Story 92. Americans have never had a free and fair election, and I do not think we are going to start anytime soon. I do not think it will look like a Russian election because it does not have to. The current playbook of voter suppression, court challenges, and propaganda works just fine. Story 93. I do not think they have ever been fair. The Electoral College and the first past the post voting system make the outcome mathematically unfair. Story 94. Are we having an election? I thought he was going to declare martial law. Story 95. In this thread, I am mad we did not win and believe the other side cheated. Trump won because Kamala was a horrible candidate. Story 96. No, they were not in 2024. With this regime in place, why would I think anything would be fair? Story 97. No, I am not confident at all, given the actions of Trump and Elon Musk. Story 98. Trump was confident enough to state openly that Putin gave him advice on how to run fair elections. Moreover, nothing that has happened over the past year is what someone concerned with winning a fair election would do. The current support and kowtowing would be unjustifiable if anyone doing it had the slightest belief that public outcry would be their undoing. Story 99. I am worried about the upcoming midterm election. The president is already talking about canceling it. If he starts a war, he will want to cancel elections. He has said as much about Ukraine. Story 100. Yes, there is no proof of any voter fraud in the United States. I am convinced that the majority of comments claiming the election was rigged are bots that want apathy toward elections. Please vote. We are in this situation because more people voted for Trump than for Harris. It is that simple. If you think there was voter fraud, show concrete proof. I know you will not find any, because never in the history of the United States has there been provable election interference. Anyone who thinks voting does not matter is either misinformed or a bot. Story 101. The United States has never had fair elections. There has always been racist gerrymandering and a reduction in the number of polling locations intended to suppress turnout among minority voters. The real question is whether the next election will be more overtly rigged. The answer is maybe. It may have been rigged in the last election. Story 102. Absolutely not. We have a president actively joking about canceling the midterm elections, and an entire party that has slowly worked to eliminate the Voting Rights Act since its inception and is now seeing the fruits of its labor. The United States is in serious trouble, and half of us cannot even see it or worse, celebrate it. Story 103. I do not, considering that the 2024 presidential election was stolen to install Trump's regime. The documented levels of voter suppression were extensive, as detailed in Greg Palast's article Trump Lost. Vote suppression 1. The statistics of the final results are so unlikely as to be virtually impossible to occur naturally. As presented on the website, the numbers are wrong. 2024. Story 104. Elections in the United States are administered by more than 3,000 counties across 50 states, with varying degrees of party control. This makes systematic rigging of elections difficult, especially under a government led by a media-obsessed pro-wrestling celebrity who lacks capacity for strategic planning. For that reason, I am much less concerned about the fairness of voting and vote tallying and more concerned about lying about the election and refusing to accept the results. This is what happened in 2020. Story 105. The rigging of elections in the United States is done in the open, particularly through purging voter registrations, reducing polling locations, and gerrymandering. Story 106. I am very concerned. The Republicans have used many deceptive tactics and they are not above acting illegally. For example, suspending elections because of some made-up national security issue. Story 107. Many voting systems are now owned by a 2020 election denier following a purchase within the past 12 months. Story 108. Trump is already setting up many obstacles to a fair election. He is really shitting his pants now. Story 109. I do not think any will be fair. The last one was not. Story 110. I worry about gerrymandering, voter suppression, the integrity of electronic voting machines, and whether there will be wildly illegal hijinks from the top or at the state level that the federal government ignores. I will vote on election day. I will not be the reason the American experiment fails. Story 111. Laughing out loud. I am starting to worry about posting on Reddit about calling out the obvious fraud in our administration. Fuck Trump. I am not suicidal. Story 112. No, not really. Billionaires have gained too much power. They are a pestilence to civilization. Story 113. Everyone knows the guy who cheats at everything, compulsively lies, and gaslights. He will make sure the whole thing seems above board. Story 114, yes, for the most part. Elections are state-controlled, so it is much harder to interfere with. Story 115. Unfair actions have already been taken, with gerrymandering as the most obvious example. There is a 100% likelihood of threats of violence at polling stations. Speculatively, there could be United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement or National Guard presence outside polling stations. Public officials are being threatened by large numbers of people, which dampens democracy. This assumes elections are not cancelled or otherwise manipulated. Story 116. I have full confidence that the Trump administration will do whatever it can to bully, intimidate, and rig elections. I also think that makes it all the more important for everyone to vote. Story 117. I think it's naive to believe any election has ever been fair. The only candidates who are not cheating are those who have not figured out how to cheat. If you knew how to cheat the system and could reliably get away with it, you would be naive not to do it when that kind of money, resources, and power are on the line. Story 118. I don't trust it and haven't since November 7, 2000. I will vote every year. It doesn't hurt. Story 119. No. I did not feel confident that the last elections were fair. Story 120. They have not been fair. There is plenty of proof of illegal gerrymandering and redlining, and that ballots were altered in the last election. It is only going to get worse. Story 121. Do not trust it. Ballot machine companies have been playing shell games. The system appears to have been tampered with and lacks oversight. The next election must be hand-counted in addition to any electronic counting. Story 122. I'm going to send my ballot by mail as soon as I can. I don't trust voting machines that might be able to change your vote. Story 123. No, James David Vance is not Mike Pence. At least Pence grew a spine. Story 124. Nope. I'm taking the Republican doomer route and will stockpile supplies. Story 125. Our elections have never been truly fair. I do not think they have much integrity today. The emperor is buck naked. Story 126. We have not had fair elections in my lifetime. I am concerned that the last election was not legitimate and that the upcoming election will not be legitimate. Story 127. I would have said yes even in the last election, but for the upcoming one I am unsure. If Donald Trump is allowed to run again, which I believe should not be permitted, then no. He will do everything in his power and ask for favors from anyone to try to remain in power, whether through election fraud or by refusing to leave office. His last plan failed, so he is likely preparing something new. I cannot imagine he would win if the election were fair. Too much has happened, and 3 more years of his messy leadership are unlikely to leave him with much genuine support. The next election needs strong turnout. Every eligible voter should vote. There is not much more damage he can cause before there is nothing left of the country. Its democracy is already fractured. Realistically, he should not be able to run again. There are worthy Republicans who could revive the Republican Party, and Democrats who could run a strong campaign for the presidency. It is time to restore a government that works for its people, not only for the elite and the powerful. The United States cannot survive much longer under this corrupt, manipulative administration. Story 128. I think elections have been tampered with since the Bush and Gore election. Story 129. Have they been fair since the introduction of electronic voting? Story 130. I think the midterm elections will be as fair as they have ever been, but the outcome is probably not going to matter nearly as much. A lot of the fundamental problems with politics in the United States today stem from the fact that Congress has been a largely failed institution for the last 25 years. In the midst of gridlock, the executive and judicial branches have taken on more power just to keep the country running. This began before Donald Trump. Given how the Supreme Court has become a partisan instrument of Donald Trump at this stage, even full Democratic control of Congress would leave Democrats effectively locked out of power. Donald Trump would likely ignore Congress, and the court would allow him. If anything, having a viable opposition would give him a scapegoat for his base. Long story short, I do not see major interference in the midterm elections as likely. The next presidential election, buckle up. It is going to be a wild one. Story 131. Yes, I think so. Last time I voted, the people who handled my ballot were very thorough. I have never had anyone look at my ID that closely. County staff will not let anything happen to my vote. They were very diligent and took their roles very seriously. Story 132. I think voters will be so tired of the current administration that cheating will not matter. More people will come out to vote and vote against him. Story 133. I am not hopeless, but I am extremely uncertain. We did see a massive wave of blue come into power in the last election, and there is genuine resistance to Trump at the state level. If a number of neutral states were allowed to flip and delegate seats were genuinely lost, I think things would still work somewhat as intended. Our system is corrupt and stacked, but it still functions. The question is how the Trump administration will handle the end of his term. Will they try to find another figurehead? Will the movement collapse? I am not sure. The horrifying, unthinkable outcome would be Trump refusing to leave power, running for a third term, or inventing a reason not to hold elections. I am praying that does not happen. Story 134. We could not get them to be entirely fair under Democratic administrations because Republican-controlled areas try to suppress black voters in every election. Now that they are stronger, they will not be fair. Story 135. Assuming fair is left vague, I believe they will continue mostly as they have. If you think they have been fair in the past, they will likely remain fair. I do not think they have been fair for decades. In the United States and most other countries, only citizens may vote, one vote per citizen. Voter fraud and deliberate undermining have compromised the principle of one person, one vote. The United States also has an election day, but courts have extended voting in many cases without new legislation. This is unlikely to change because elections are administered locally at the county level. Practices will probably remain until people are arrested, convicted, and imprisoned. Story 136. I do not trust anyone or anything in politics right now, and that goes for both sides. We are all alone. Story 137. Reddit has repeatedly said there is zero evidence of election fraud. So I believe election fraud isn't an issue. Story 138. No, but I think both sides have been engaging in unfair practices for years. Story 139. There are many Jim Crow laws that make it easy to discard votes in predominantly black districts. Story 140. We have not had a fair election in at least 20 years. States are gerrymandered to favor Republicans, and the electronic voting machines are not secure. Story 141. Honestly, yes. I haven't seen anything suggesting the Trump administration is remotely competent enough to rig anything correctly. Story 142. They cannot be fair when all candidates are bought before they even take office. Story 143. Nope, especially with Elon Musk throwing his hat back in the ring. Story 144. No chance. Many of the red states are being pressured by Trump to adjust their maps to gain Republican seats. The reason the Democrats will win is the large number of frustrated, angry citizens who are tired of the illegal and questionable acts by the current administration. Story 145. Our last election was not fair. All the adults have left the room, so we are cooked. Story 146. Laughably, we have been gerrymandering for so long that it is taught in public schools. I have seen 2 presidents lose the popular vote and win the electoral college vote. Look at campaign contributions and you will see that Republican campaigns raise 200 to 400% more than Democratic campaigns, yet still lose or win by margins much smaller than their fundraising would suggest. There has not been a time in my life when any election was fair. Story 147. I think we will have elections. I suspect the results will be respected with all the grace and dignity that Donald Trump and his supporters showed on January 6, 2021. I am relatively certain that fraud and physical intimidation will be directed by him and his closest allies in an attempt to retain control of the United States Congress. Story 148. How can you, when Make America Great Again partially owns the election apparatus? Story 149. I cannot think of any election that did not have accusations of cheating. Also, this is not set up to be fair. There is a reason we have to choose between Dumb and Dumber every year. Story 150. Trump has a history of tampering with elections. He is definitely going to try again. Story 151. This is not about whether it is unfair. It is about the fact that too few people vote. Everyone needs to register and vote. I do not care who you support. Just do it. We cannot continue as a country if only a third or less of the population votes. That is how elections go wrong and harmful people win. Story 152. I do. Our election system is a giant, convoluted mess. But the upside is that it is incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to manipulate. Story 153. Nope. Story 154. Fairness isn't even in the equation anymore. The game was rigged from the start. Story 155. I volunteer as an election official. I encourage everyone to volunteer as an election official. Story 156. Mostly yes. The system is so decentralized that it would be incredibly difficult to rig without being discovered. However, it remains tilted toward conservatives in many ways, such as gerrymandering and the Electoral College. Story 157. Nothing is fair. The votes are fabricated and none of it matters. It is like the show Whose Line Is It Anyway? At this point. Story 158. Republicans have done a lot of damage to our election system, but those problems can all be overcome by numbers. Story 159. Midterm elections will be identical to how they have been in the United States in recent years. There are too many moving parts at the local level for a grand conspiracy like the one claimed during the 2020 elections. What will happen is an attempt to delegitimize the results through online media, cable media, and social media. Story 160. I do not see the next election happening fairly. That is sad. Is it not? Story 161. There is zero chance that Pumpkin POTUS will refrain from trying to interfere if he thinks he is going to jail. Story 162. It will be about as fair as the last 10 elections. It is not fair in the slightest. Story 163. I think it is time for all voting to be conducted online. There is no reason in 2025 to use paper ballots. They are prone to human error. I am not concerned that elections are unfair. Despite the chatter, nothing has been proven. Story 164. Nope. They are going to be thoroughly destroyed. It has already started. Plus, Elon is back to interfere with the voting machines. Story 165. I expect a lot of misconduct, perhaps more than in the last 2 cycles, especially if they try to push for a third term. Story 166. Do not use the Ask Americans subreddit for this nonsense. Quit clogging it with pointlessly narrow questions. Story 167. Regardless of who wins, the losing side will cry foul. In all seriousness, 2020 showed that claims of rigged elections were false and we have a secure voting system. I believe nothing has changed to threaten that, so the next election will be every bit as secure as 2020. Story 168. Did the country whose president we just kidnapped get hacked by Russian hackers? And did the same internet protocol addresses appear to have reached some tallying centers in the United States? Maybe. Story 169. I can name 2 countries and 1 individual with more influence on our politicians than half the population, and I am unwilling to name the second country because of its influence. Story 170. I fear we are doomed to live under this nightmare for all time. Story 171. Apparently, the Canadian government is actively preparing for civil unrest after the 2026 election, and there is concern it will spill over the border. Story 172. If you are not concerned, you are not paying attention. Story 173. I'm willing to bet every election has had some shenanigans. The mafia stole the election for John F. Kennedy. Story 174. No, but I will vote every time, even in my WhatsApp group when choosing a movie. I have lived long enough without this right, and I have to make it worth it. Story 175. Voting should be in person on 1 or 2 election days, require voter identification, and prohibit mail-in voting except in extreme circumstances. Story 176. I do not know. I hope for the best. Most states should have it under control, but as we know, it only takes a state or 2 to decide an election. I also think people should be aware that Dominion Voting Systems was bought by a Republican election official a few months ago, who then settled the lawsuits they were involved in. That is not a good sign. Story 177. Without the 18 to 30-year-old voting landslide against Republicans, voter suppression would be at its maximum. Story 178. I am not confident and I will not jump the gun yet. There is no benefit in doing so because I cannot do much about it. Story 179. Of course, I have been assured for more than 20 years that elections are fair and secure. Story 180. Copied ballots, counting that continues for days after the polls close, machines that flip votes, and people who are not eligible to vote. Story 181. I am concerned that even if we have a clear winner in the 2026 midterms, will the states ratify it? Story 182. If elections happen, Trump's party will lose enormously despite their best efforts to gerrymander things in their favor. While his most ardent supporters remain slavishly devoted to mindlessly vacuuming up his fecal matter with their slack mouths every time he defecates, the things the Republican Party has done have clearly and drastically depressed turnout in parts of the country that he won comfortably in the last election, based on a number of precursor elections. And that was before an immigration and customs enforcement agent murdered Renee Good in cold blood. What is perhaps more likely to happen is Trump refusing to accept the results of an election in which he and his party lose in a generationally catastrophic fashion, leading to, you guessed it, our latest constitutional crisis. Hopefully Trump will be little more than a barely conscious shambling mound of flesh by then, with his heinous lickspittles too embroiled in infighting and backstabbing to competently succeed him. I try to be an optimist sometimes. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.